First of all, we're talking about this issue of chronic absence, which is missing so much school for any reason that a child is academically at risk. And we define that as 10%, partly because there's lots of research that shows that 10%, we definitely know kids are having challenges. I will tell you, it's not like a kid, let's say it's a 180-day school year, goes from 17 to 18, and all of a sudden they went from an A to an F. That is not how it works, right? Each day gone is more of a problem. But if you use 10%, you'll notice just 2 days in the first month, 4 days in the second month, 6 days in the next month, so you can start to use prevention and early intervention as kids start to fall off track. But what's really key is it's excused, unexcused, and suspensions. If we think that classroom instruction matters, the classroom experience matters, then not being in the classroom matters too. And it doesn't matter why they're gone, it's a cause for understanding what's going on. What we're really trying to do as a country is shift from a paradigm that has been focused on truancy, which has really been focused on the issue of compliance. Truancy was about, you need to comply with our compulsory education laws, which say you should be in school. Or you need to give this data because this is how we're going to fund you. That's compliance. Not that compliance it's not necessarily bad, it's just not sufficient. And typically, it's looked at individuals, and it's looked at more legal solutions. It's the nasty letters. You don't show up to school, eventually we're going to threaten you with court. But it happens late in the game, late after habits are already formed. What we want to do is move to chronic absence because we're looking at all absences. It's actually a different conversation with parents. Let's say if you're in a truancy conversation, I said to your mom, Tanae missed school, and your mom says, oh, but we had a good excuse. This has happened. That's the wrong conversation. Tanae missed school. When she missed school, she missed out on this incredibly important math lesson. What are we going to do? How are we going to make sure she makes up? That's the right conversation. I don't, on some level, really care whether she's got a good excuse or not. I want Tanae to learn. And I actually think it's a better conversation to have parents, because parents have hopes and dreams. And then you're applying to that, not trying to figure out if they can find a doctor's note to get the right excuse. It's about taking prevention, problem-solving approaches. It's actually being trauma-informed. So, there is research now that shows, it falls into what I call the research, There's a lot of things that we have to prove by research that you would know from common sense, but it is good to have research to back it up. So I had colleagues of mine who were, I said, we really need research showing the connection between ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences. How many of you heard of ACEs? And more ACEs kids have, the more health challenges, more other kinds of issues. Well, it turns out, more ACEs kids have, the higher likelihood of chronic absence. 3 or more ACEs, you were more likely to be chronically absent. 1 ACE is connected to violence in the community, and you were more likely to be chronically absent. But when kids have experienced trauma, the key thing is not to say what's wrong with you. It actually re-traumatizes kids, right? The key is to say, what happened to you, and how can I help? If we know chronic absence is connected to trauma, we have to transform the way our schools have this is across the country, this is not just Missouri. Across the country have taken a truancy kind of much more legal and much more punitive approach to using chronic absence as an early sign that we need engagement, we need support, and this data will help us figure out where we can do that most. We can't have a gazillion tiered approaches with a different committee for every type of approach. It's the same committee taking a deeper look at how this data works. But what I would say is we've actually started to flip the pyramid. Because what I want people to know is you need tier 1 and then tier 2 in order to prevent kids from being in tier 3. When you have high levels of chronic absence, it means you don't have sufficient tier 1 and tier 2 in place. And if you have high levels for a particular population, like African American kids. Maybe all the other kids feel welcome and engaged in the school, but that group of kids is not. And we'll have to take a hard look at it. When you have high levels of, and if you have an entire school with high levels of chronic absence, maybe the structure of that school is not working for any kid in that building. This is why you also want community partners, because when the levels get too high, you might need to have help to improve the conditions. You know, if it's a small number of kids, a small student support group can help it. If it's bigger, everyone in the entire school is going to have to help. And then if it's even bigger than that, you might need community partners so you can put in place those tier 1 and tier 2 supports. This is what we call taking a data-driven systemic approach that has, you've got shared accountability. You guys have shared accountability. You've had the 90-90 rule for a long time. You've also got your state ESSA plan. But now we're moving to much more actionable data, because just end of the year data is not actionable. End of the year data doesn't allow you to take preventive action. But then the preventive action, that's where we have to build capacity, because you need positive engagement so that they can make that shift from truancy to chronic absence and a positive problem-solving approach. And then you can use this data to figure out where you need strategic partnerships. Chronic absence, again, just going back at this report, there's a little graph that talks about 14% of your schools in the area in Kansas City, 20% or more levels of chronic absence. 29%, you have 11 to 20, have between 11 and 20% levels. And then you have 10% or less. Those 14% might need extra supports. When you look at that 11 to 20%, you might want to look at, is it particular subpopulations that are affected? Maybe for those subpopulations, you really need community partners who know how to reach those subpopulations. This data allows you to take preventive action and think about where you can, because the good news is chronic absence isn't everywhere. By the way, do y'all know what the best predictor of chronic absence is? Anyone? They're like, it's a trick question. Okay, the best predictor of chronic absence is chronic absence. I'm saying this because any group, even among Native American kids who I said were disproportionately, the majority still are not chronically absent. You can't use race, you can't use poverty, you can't use neighborhood to know a kid's going to be chronically absent. Families are creative, students are creative. But if a child was chronically absent the prior year, pretty good chance they're going to be chronically absent again. If the child has chronic absence the first month of school, pretty good chance they're going to continue to be so. You use data to identify where you use the supports. And then you can use data to think about what kind of community partners might help you tailor the response to that population. But you never want to go to stereotyping. You always want to use data to figure out who you want to support.